So welcome everyone. First of all, I just want to say a big thank you for taking time out of your evening to join us, especially now that pubs and restaurants are open. I know probably, there's a bit more competition for your time, so thank you. My name's Marika. I wear a few hats for the Girls Rugby Club. I do the PR and marketing. I'm an advisory board member and a rugby player myself, although currently retired. I am contemplating a comeback, just getting a bit too much FOMO, to be honest. But for those of you who are new to the Girls Rugby Club, we're on a really exciting mission here. We're working to be a really strong independent voice for female rugby players, to advocate on their behalf and to address some of the issues and inequalities that exist within the game. We're also very passionate about providing opportunities like this tonight to develop not only as rugby women, but off the field as well. And we're really fortunate to have a network of incredibly driven and successful women in rugby. So we thought, why not pick their brains? So that's why tonight we've got 5 of those women who I'll introduce you to shortly. Tonight's panel is all about giving female rugby players the tools to really unlock their value, to put their hands up for the growing commercial opportunities that we're seeing come into the sport. You might have seen just yesterday some findings released by the Women's Sport Trust and Two Circles, which projected that the revenue generated by women's sport in the UK alone is set to grow by £1 billion a year by 2030. To be honest, that's not super surprising to us, I don't think, because we know better than anyone the potential. But it's great that more and more businesses, sponsors, brands, unions, decision makers are starting to recognise that potential too. So tonight, we've got a range of topics really to work through, but we'll be discussing sort of the value of our sport, the changing women's rugby landscape, but importantly, how we can tap into that and make sure us as players aren't left behind. How can we take advantage of the opportunities? What actually is our worth? Why should we care about our personal brand? I know that term personal brand is sometimes, a little bit kind of like la-di-da, but it is important that we, can have an authentic voice and a platform, as well as being commercially attractive to brands. And importantly, I think, maintain the integrity of women's rugby. So I want to be clear, this isn't just about sort of the big high profile international players either, sort of the Emily Scarretts of the world. This is players of all levels. We've got some really exciting sort of grassroots players that are creating a space for themselves online. The likes of Zia Lima, who I think is on the call tonight actually, who has really built a platform around her passion for rugby and her aspirations. So we'll start with a bit from the panel and we'll work through some of those kind of discussion topics, and we'll keep it kind of nice and light and casual. And then we'll move into some Q&A at the end. So if you do have questions, make sure you kind of just keep them in the back of your mind. And then when we do come to the end, we'll just kind of throw to you basically, so you can take the floor and pose whatever questions you have. I'll just ask you to put your microphones on mute until that time though, just so that only the sort of panel members can be heard. So enough from me. I'll now hand over to our brilliant panel to introduce themselves before we dive into it. So Flo, I'll hand over to you, mate.
Oh, thanks for that. So I am also a rugby player, currently playing at Wasps and have been playing in the Premiership for about 9 years or so. So very much understand the struggle of being a female athlete and seeing what it's like on the ground, but then having also worked in marketing for about 5 or 6 years. And that combined passion led me to found the Perception Agency about 18 months ago, which is a marketing agency based around changing the perception of women's sport through athlete branding, team branding, sponsorship and social campaigns. So it's just, using my combined experience of seeing and feeling what it's like as an athlete, and then seeing the other side of that and learning how to potentially change and remove a few of those barriers for a few people in the future.
Nice one. And Steph, come to you next.
Hi, I'm Steph. I founded Rugette RFC and I currently play my rugby at Bristol Bears. And I started the company just over 2 years ago now. with the intention to solve problems for female rugby players. Right now, that looks like creating apparel, but in a broader sense, the brand is really about facilitating gaps in the women's rugby market, providing metrics for the market's growth and the market size, and in the future, hopefully expanding the product range as well. But just basically really into rugby, and wanted to do it, I guess, all of the hours of my day. So here I am doing that.
Love to hear it. Victoria, I'll throw to you.
Hi. Yeah, sure. Victoria Rush. Yeah, I've been working in marketing, probably similar to kind of everybody here, really, about the last 10 years. A lot in personal branding, recruitment, and sport, fortunately. And at the moment, I am a producer for O2. So I work really heavily on their rugby side, which is obviously great fun. So anything you see from them, if you like it, it was me. If you don't like it, it wasn't. But in my spare time, I am a documentary producer as well. And in terms of like rugby, I play for Richmond. I actually tried to retire maybe 4 years ago, but that's failed miserably. So I'm still here and at Richmond at the moment.
Right, yeah, I know those feelings. Just never ever really hang up the boots. Jenny, we'll come to you next.
Hi guys, I'm Jenny. I work at MC Saatchi Sport and Entertainment, and actually Victoria and the O2 team are one of our clients, which we're very lucky to have. We specialise in passion point marketing, so we help brands connect to consumers through their passions, and in my case it's sport. I'm probably one of the rugby experts at M&C. I've worked on Six Nations, Premiership Rugby, England Rugby, and I think what makes my heart beat and what gets me excited is the wave of change in rugby and the fact that there's more focus on women's and girls. And I think that's where I'm in the future trying to steer brands in the right direction, but show them not only is it the right thing to do, but actually it's really commercially beneficial.
Brilliant. And Emma, last but not least.
Hi guys, I'm Emma Clark. I'm a commercial sports agent with the Athletic Network. I'm relatively new to the sports industry, but have as much passion as people who've been in it for 20 years plus, or, you know, a year, whatever. We work across all sports, so it's a 360 sports agency, and we like to do things left field. We like to get into the cracks that brands and athletes don't really know how to get into, and create content and activations for sponsorships. And like I said, we just go left field. We want to do things differently. We want to break the mold, especially in female sport. There's so much potential to be had, and not a lot of brands or companies or businesses even know how to utilize that. So it's essentially providing them content that they didn't know they want. And also I'm heavily involved with the Association of Sporting Directors. So we essentially cater to sporting directors across England, Europe, give them information they need. I deal with their memberships, commercial aspects. So I'm their go-to person when they have a problem. So that's good for networking and, you know, just getting a feel about everyone in sport basically, and what they're doing and, you know, the problems they have. So yeah, it's great, and it keeps me busy. So, and then it leads me to stuff like this. So it's amazing.
Yeah, brilliant. No, it's so good to have you all involved, and I think it's a really kind of diverse and varied panel tonight. So I'm really excited about that. I think a good place to start would be to kind of look at the state of play. Where is women's rugby sitting right now from a commercial and monetization point of view? What's changing, and what are some of the sort of big highlights of the past year or so? I know definitely from where I sit, it feels like there's a real kind of movement and a lot of momentum within women's rugby. So not sure, Steph, would you like to kick off? I know you're someone that has the finger on the pulse, and you know, there's a lot of stuff that you've been kind of very vocal about online. You know, what have you sort of seen change recently, and I guess what are some of the highlights for you?
I think for me, the biggest change that I've seen is around the way that I think we as a society and we as a sporting group react to negative pushback in the women's rugby community and the women's sports community in general. I remember in the not so distant past, seeing or hearing negative messaging or anything that could be kind of in a blanket statement said to be trolling or bullying or just uncalled for, and have everyone sort of being uncomfortable with it, but not really putting a lot towards changing it, just sort of having it as being, oh, it's kind of uncomfortable and that wasn't really cool. But in the last, year to 2 years, I'd say there's been this sort of switch wherein it seems like the vast majority of people, not just us who are very intimately involved with the concepts in the community, and we do this all the time, but even the wider public just instantly looking at something like that and being like, that's not on, which is for me really, really uplifting, because, when something that you encounter so often and know to be not okay isn't sort of widely seen as not okay, it can be a little bit disheartening. But certainly recently, I felt like the things that I don't want to tolerate in society and in the women's sporting world in general, I feel like there's just never been more widespread support for that. So that's really uplifting to see. And we see it a lot with like not only like like big social media movements that gain traction, but even in a lot of these little micro conversations you see happening on social media, on Twitter especially, where if something does get said or something is publicized with problematic messaging, chances are someone's going to say something about it, and that makes me pretty happy, if I'm honest, because I think the more we can have public conversations to discuss why something's not okay and how to fix it, the more likely that one, it's not going to happen again, or if it does, someone might think twice before they say something the way they say it, or they might think twice before putting somebody in an ad over somebody else. The more conversations we can have publicly, the better. So the fact that these conversations seem to be happening so often in a way that they weren't before, I think is just really uplifting, and a really good measure of the strides that women's sports has taken in general, but especially women's rugby.
Yeah. And Flo, I know you're obviously someone as well that has been part of that. What are your sort of thoughts?
Yeah, I think it is, as Steph's saying, like, it's nice to see that when things are not quite right, or when there's the trolling of female athletes or just the sport in general, or teams are potentially a bit irresponsible with the selection of the gender parity when it comes to promoting the game, people are feeling empowered in the right to say, actually, this isn't cool and that's not right. And the most promising thing of all is that brands listen, because as you can spend 20-30 years building a reputation and you can lose it in a second. And it's clearer now more than ever that understanding your audience and what they care about socially can have a huge impact on the implications of your brand and the perception of it. And obviously without fans, brands don't succeed. You don't get audience members, you don't get people going to games, you don't get people investing in club merchandise or ticketing or whatever that it may be. So being socially responsible and aware of what people care about and making sure that you align to that in everything you do, whether you're pro direct and you're trying to sell boots to a predominantly male market, but you understand rugby is played by two genders and you literally have no female athletes on your entire newsfeed, people start noticing that. So like, silence, it's now not okay to say nothing. It's now not okay to just sponsor a men's team, or the BBC just putting the men's game up and no mention of the women's game. It's no longer okay to just promote the men's kit. People are actually, that silence of what's happening with the women's game is becoming more and more deafening, and more people are actually open to saying, actually, no, this isn't cool. And I personally wouldn't want to follow a sport who aren't supportive of the 3.6 billion women there are in the world. And it's just the joint empowerment of people who have understood that it's not okay and it's actually okay to say something about it. And I know sometimes it's like, oh God, don't draw attention to those people who are not representing us how we'd want to be. But at the same time, like, if you say nothing, don't expect anything to change. So sometimes you've got to go through these periods of uncomfortable nature and calling stuff out and saying, actually, I don't think this is great, in order for us to get to a better future. And I do think we are in the middle of this difficult period. But I think in 10 years' time, the landscape of women's sport will be so far ahead of where it is now, even though we already have come so far, but there's a lot further to go. And that's why I think now is like such an exciting time to be part of women's sport, because people are ready and open for change and audience want it.
Yeah, and Jenny, I know obviously you've sort of said it's not only potentially quite lucrative for brands, but it's also the right thing to do. Like, are you sort of seeing that from brands that you work with and sort of within your sort of agency?
100%. And I think you'll see with a lot of brands now, if you Google brand purpose, it's everywhere, and every brand wants to have a purpose, because to get cut through with consumers, it's really hard now because of regulation. A lot of products do the same thing. So how do you get their attention? You stand for something. So I think we see that with brands like Nike and Adidas, who do that really well. But I think what the difference is now is that brands are kind of realizing, they're waking up to the fact that the next generation, millennials and Gen Z, won't just take the sort of 1950s stereotypes of putting women as second class. You know, they want gender parity, and they're demanding it, and they'll walk away from brands and won't purchase their products unless they see it, which is really exciting. I think there's a stat on the Global Web Index, 1 in 4 Gen Zs are actively behind a cause and actively involved with the cause. We're seeing a very different type of person coming through. So when you see the likes of Piers Morgan saying snowflake, well, actually these guys are changing the way we do things, and this is really exciting. And what that means for brands is they're having to change how they behave, and they're having to be genuine. So there's a big piece you'll probably hear brands say, brand say and brand do. So it's very well you can say things, but actually you need to do it now. The modern day consumer won't tolerate brands not making a stand, not treating men and women equally, which is, I think Victoria will come on to what O2 do, which is brilliant, which is invest equally within the men's and women's teams for England Rugby. But there is still a lot to do. And I think what we need to do is get that balance of helping them understand it is the right thing to do, but then showing them the commercial value. And there's so much. Women's sport is so untapped. But, you know, after this week, seeing football implode, I'm a football fan, but I did quite enjoy the sort of money fall in and everyone and it explode into chaos. Actually, women's sport as a platform is a pretty pure platform. It's based on integrity. It's based on brilliant sportsmanship, and it's really untapped. You know, which brand's going to fill Twickenham and be the first brand to do that? Which brand's going to be the first brand to be the sponsor of the Women's Six Nations? There is so much opportunity there for brands to take ownership and make change. And I think now there's not only the stats and facts that show that's what audiences want, but also I think there's ways that we can show them that commercially it will benefit them too.
Yeah. So, I mean, that probably makes sense then to go to you, Victoria. I mean, being within O2 as an organisation, and what are you sort of seeing? And obviously you're creating a lot of like really authentic, purpose-driven content.
Yeah, I guess from that point that Jenny's just made, I think that almost the argument for brands has changed. It's not why are we promoting women's sport, but how are we promoting women's sport, which is a much more beautiful place to sort of world to live in, and it makes, like, for me personally, going to work a hell of a lot easier. Like O2 are a really good example. They have pledged to equally fund the men's and women's games, and you don't see that very often. And what for me was quite humbling about O2 is that they don't shout about it. They just did it and moved on, and let it happen. And I think there's 2 arguments. If you look at Burger King, when they released their sponsorship announcement with Stevenage Women's Football, that video was amazing. It didn't look like it was a men's or a women's team. They were just making a very clear point about it's hard enough to play for Stevenage. Let's not make it any harder for the women. Where and O2 took a different kind of direction. They funded equally, but they did it in kind of in the shadows because it was the right thing to do, and it didn't need any more shouting about it, which I think is kind of brilliant in some ways. Brands are definitely recognizing that there's more earned media, I guess, for them. You don't have to pay for PR if you're doing the right thing, because people will come, especially at the moment when you're the first brand to make a move in an industry, to stand out from the crowd and lead from the front. You will get people coming to you naturally, and that I think will resonate for female players as they always start to get picked up and sponsored. And and brands start to work with them, that will definitely resonate for the players.
Yeah, 100%. And Emma, I guess from your point of view, I mean, what are you sort of seeing in your world currently and around sort of things like player representation? And I know you're very passionate about changing sort of the landscape for women in sport.
Yeah, I mean, I do think brands need to invest in the unhyped athlete, and, you know, not just look at the superstars, because there's talent all across the board, and sponsorship in its simplest form is to relieve the stress of the athlete so they can go and train, and that isn't really the case. And I know it doesn't bring massive ROI for brands, but if you invest in an athlete and then build them up, you know, all the social media aspects will come with it, because that's the first thing they look at. And not the athlete isn't focusing on their social media, they want to focus on the sport, so they don't really have the guidance to put out a digital imprint to the world, because they're just posting on Instagram of their daily lives. They're not thinking in the back of their head, oh, I'll post this so a brand will invest in me or take a chance on me. So there's so many aspects of me guiding an athlete, so for instance, Laura Rafferty, who's my client, she plays for Bristol. She is a Common Goal ambassador. And instead of just putting out a Common Goal announcement, one of her pledges was for sport against racism in Ireland. So we got her on a Zoom with Rihanna, who's an ambassador for Saudi. And, you know, they shared stories. They were passionate about what they stood for and what changes they wanted to make. And that was just us coming up with that content and putting that out. And, you know, athletes need to look at the bigger picture. They need to take chances and create content and say to the brand, if they're with one, you know, is this okay? Can we post this? Can we attach your name to it? And more often than not, the brand says yeah, because the content's good. And we've done that a couple of times, and we've done it with Maita for Laura as well. We've done a whole shoot, asked Maita could we post it, and they were more than happy to. Then we done like a year now where we asked Laura questions, and she tapped either button and then gave her answer why she's given that answer to the question. But you just got to make it fun. You've got to be authentic to yourself. And I can only guide my athletes. I can't say to them, you need to do this, because that takes who they are away from them. If you get me, like, I can add little bits of information and suggest things, but it has to come from them. Everything has to be genuine to build their brand, get brands involved with them as well. There's just so much you can talk about. You can go on for hours.
You're totally right, and that kind of genuine content is what people relate to and connect with, isn't it? And that directed content, I think, is really interesting as well, like you said. So I'm sure we can kind of come to that a bit more soon. An interesting comment here from Adrian around the Women's Six Nations Fantasy League. I mean, obviously that is amazing to have that this year, but he's mentioned there obviously the use of a promotional photo of the men's Six Nations teams in association with that. So I think that's interesting. Like we've kind of spoken about a little bit, is if you're going to do it properly, and have it kind of like end to end, and make sure there's no sort of like, I guess potholes. That's interesting. I didn't notice that, Adrian, but thanks for bringing that up. I want to come now, I guess, to a little bit about what Jenny was saying around demonstrating the commercial value of women's sport and attracting brands and investment and recognition into the game. I think often elite sport revenue sort of tends to be founded on three things, and that's sort of like TV rights, spectator attendance, or like stadium numbers, and sponsorships. But it always seems sort of so chicken and egg. It's like a lack of money equals a lack of promotion equals small audiences equals a lack of sponsors. I mean, what do we need to be doing and how can we sort of demonstrate the value? Does anyone want to sort of put a hand up to kick us off there? Yeah, go on, Emma.
I mean, I feel for women in any sport, there is a responsibility to create awareness for their sport. Whereas the men, they go, they put their kits on and they play and then they go home or whatever. They don't have that pressure on, we need to raise the game, we need to raise the awareness. So I feel like for women's sport, everybody needs to do their bit. But say, for instance, I went to a women's football game and the tickets were there for everybody to have, but there was no marketing. Everybody was like, where did you get the tickets from? And I was like, oh, I just got them off this website. And it was a chance to go to that stadium that you might not have had previously, even if you are a fan of that club. And the club didn't do enough to advertise the game, and they could have filled it way more. And I feel like the clubs, they don't put enough advertisement out. They need to do more. I think they need to be separate from the men totally and have their own sponsorship commercial team. And I think they need to go and search for that themselves. But like I said, they don't know how to utilize that, so it's a bit tricky. But the South African women's national team, they're a separate entity to the men. They're perfectly fine with that. They've created their own sponsorship packages. Yeah, I'm really proud to be involved with them. The ecosystem they've got running there is absolutely stellar, and they're just focusing on their brand awareness, but obviously they need help, so that's why they brought me in. But I feel like it's on everybody. It's on the players. They've got to build their own brand, but then also worry about raising the game, which that shouldn't really be on them. So I feel like more brands should look for investments into women's sports. Like I said, give them what they don't know they need. But yeah, I mean, it's on everyone, I think, but it shouldn't really be on the athletes to focus on that aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Jenny, Victoria, like what is your experience in this? Like, what are brands looking for before they sort of make those decisions?
I think from our point of view, the brands tend to look at two things predominantly. Firstly, does the brand fit work for them for what they're trying to do? So what I sort of mentioned earlier, a lot of brands are looking to sort of clarify what their brand purpose is. And often they'll utilize cause related or doing the right thing. So a really good recent example, we worked with NatWest, and they had a campaign called Cricket Has No Boundaries, and it was they basically sponsored the men's, women's, disability and visibly impaired teams, and they wanted to demonstrate that, you know, cricket provides a sport that's for anyone. It doesn't matter of your ability, your sex, you know, everyone can get involved. And that was a really good thing for them to do, because in a banking market, all banks have to offer the same. They're really heavily regulated, but that's helped them stand out to be a bank with a heart, a bank doing the right thing. So I think that's really important. So they'll look at a sport and see whether the values are aligned and see where they can help. And obviously with women's sport, there is a lot that brands can do. And then secondly, it's about back to that bottom line piece. So how are they, what as a brand, what are they looking to achieve? Are they looking to capture new audiences? We know specifically brands are now looking to go for younger audiences. They want to get people at those life change moments. So, you know, when you look to buy your first car, when you're buying your first house, those really key moments where you'll buy into a brand and then you'll probably stay with them for a long time, which generally now tends to be slightly younger. And we know with a lot of sports, especially men's sports, when you look at sort of rugby and cricket, they do skew towards sort of 50-year-old men as a kind of the standard audience. So actually women's rugby provides a really great opportunity because you can engage a younger audience, because we know from working with O2, we know that the Women's Rugby World Cup in 2017, on Twitter, the audience figures were 50-50 male and female. You do not get that in men's rugby. And then also looking towards the sort of purchaser in the households, when you're trying to target the people that are going to be buying things, you know, it's families. You know, if you've got a family, you're spending a lot of money because families need a lot of stuff to kind of carry the day along. So again, if you're showing how you're backing gender parity and supporting women's sport, you're going to appeal specifically to families, because whether you're a, you know, if you're a parent, a carer, a grandparent, you know, you want to support brands that are going to look after your family and stand for what you care about, which is that men and women are equal. It feels so simple, doesn't it? When you talk about it like that. But I think that, you know, the audience bit for me is what women's rugby can really unlock, and whether you're a a girls player, a school player, whether you're an international player, if you can demonstrate who you can access through your platform and who you can unlock for brands, I think that's a really exciting opportunity, because we know the men's players don't have the same audience.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I mean, obviously, like, there's a lot of women sort of at that age where they're even having families and still playing rugby, and so some of those key kind of decision makers in the household, that would be interesting to tap into. I mean, Flo, obviously you've gone like kind of a different route at some points in terms of like, directly calling brands out online and things like that. I mean, that's obviously worked in the likes of Canterbury. I mean, do you kind of have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there's in terms of growing the game and what brands want from it, it's that fine line of getting that niche of it's the right thing to do and there is financial opportunity in it. Because if you go straight in with this is a really big financial opportunity, it could end up looking like a bit of a poor business decision, because women's sport doesn't garner the same viewing figures and audience numbers as women's sport. But if you then hyperbole that with it's also the right thing to do, you actually get like a really cool investment opportunity of like, this is an untapped, unfarmed market that has got such a huge opportunity to growth. And at a time where everybody is very socially conscious and being aware of whose values are what, standing for women's sport, you cannot do any wrong with it personally, because yes, sport holds lots of values in terms of work ethic and integrity, but women's sport does that times 10 because of the barriers and the situations that female athletes have to overcome. I just see female sport and female athletes being like the perfect brand ambassadors for brands who want to stand for something, who are socially conscious. And I understand that, we are in that chicken and egg situation of we need money to put money into marketing budgets to get people to come to games. And then once people come to games, you can then sell viewing figures and you can make the ball starts rolling. But now is the time for the brands that aren't desperate for awareness figures, but they are desperate for positive influence from audience, and they are desperate for looking like the brand who are the most socially conscious. They're the brands that need to take the punt on women's sport, who just want to be seen to be doing the right thing and got the finger on the pulse of being socially aware, not necessarily doing it because we want to see huge viewing figures. So when you see brands like Visa, who are heavily involved in women's football, they're a global brand. They're not doing it because they want to get more people to spend money with using their credit cards. They're doing it because they want to look like a socially responsible brand, because banks, shock horror, don't have the best reputation. So it's these brands that are huge, and they're not doing it because they're a startup and we just need eyeballs. They're doing it because they've got the eyeballs, they've got the money. Now it's just really looking after the audience members and building on a foundation of trust and loyalty, which is so important with branding and marketing. And I do think trust and loyalty is something that is exuded hugely within women's sport. So brands that support women's sport would be seen to do the right thing and also be game changers in that zone. And everyone wants to be the first of something. And especially big brands out there. So I think now is the time for the bigger brands to get on the back of women's sport and then be able to say, oh well, we changed the game for women's rugby because we supported the Six Nations or the Prem 15s, or we got the first broadcast deal for a season, or whatever it may be. That's where the selling point is. There's no point going in and saying women's sport is going to make you a shit ton of money really, really quickly, because it probably won't do it straight away, but it will change your brand perception, which in the long run will get your new audience members in and your new customers in for a very long time and build a trustworthy fan base, which at the end of the day, that's kind of what everyone's looking for. So I think that's where the ball will start rolling.
You're right. I think it's about getting in now and sort of building sort of a long-term relationship, and being able to kind of turn around and say you've been there from kind of, early on and help to really grow and change the game. Whereas, you're not just a brand that's throwing money at something like the Premier League, which is already incredibly rich and wealthy. Yeah, that's
if people are chasing viewing figures and stuff, then they can go and have football and they can go and sponsor Cristiano Ronaldo for one Instagram post and be happy with it. But or you can actually make a huge impact for a lot less money and actually say that you've changed something. And I think at the moment, like with the stats about Gen Z people having a lot more consciousness around social decisions, I think that's actually more important than just being seen. Yeah, it's being seen, but did you have an emotional connection with who saw you? And I think that women's sport is delivered at a far higher rate.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like what you were saying about like what the goal of a brand, what a brand's goal is with any, involvement with anything. If it's viewership, that's fine, but the appeal of women's athletes and women's rugby players in specifics is not limited to people who are already into rugby or already into watching a full-length game. Even the themes that women's rugby allows us to discuss are society-wide, and they're also having a huge big moment in society, concepts around body positivity, different types of athleticisms, and the types of femininity that we reward, much less allow and accept. Like these are universal themes that are not specific to the sporting community and not specific to rugby by any stretch of the imagination. But rugby creates this really interesting environment and way to talk about it and way to have it be visible. And that whole concept is hugely marketable and hugely emotional for a customer or somebody to connect with, that has nothing to do with watching a game. And for me, that's the biggest thing. I think that the vast majority of both brands, but also potential investors and even athletes, the way that we market ourselves and the way that we think of ourselves as being interesting, is too narrow. I think, it's very important that we get as many people, when we're allowed to, as many people to come to a game. That's for sure. But I think that if we use that as the measure of success for female rugby as a market, then we're going to be inherently limiting our reach. When you look at somebody like Serena Williams and the things that she's able to advocate for, or the brands she's able to work with, and the number of people who follow her on Instagram and share the things she does and watch the content that she puts out there and have never seen her play, it's huge. And show me like the unnervingly large and separate Venn diagram of people who have never watched a basketball game but share Michael Jordan stuff, or have owned something that said Jordan at some point in their life, right? Like the interesting thing about an athlete is what they do for a job, but it's also much bigger than that. And when we get so hung up on, when we get these viewership figures, then I find that a little bit frustrating for everybody involved, because the way I see it, especially with social media and the way that we consume content, both material and immaterial now, it's not one or the other. It's like, there's more than one avenue and there's more than one appeal for female athletes. And I think that that's really important for all of us to take into consideration when we are marketing ourselves, or looking for if we are working with a brand, or as a brand looking for somebody that could represent something for us in a sponsorship sort of application, because it really does depend on what you're trying to achieve and what you're looking for. But the marketability of a female rugby player is far greater than what she does on a field.
I totally agree with that. And some of the stats that came out this week from the Women's Sports Trust report about the visibility gap was 52% of women's sport is consumed digitally. So whereas men's sport is all about what goes on TV and what's on the broadcast, women's sport is a bit more about what's going on in the social channels and the people behind the scoreline kind of thing. So it actually is really important to not necessarily be the best player on the field, but also be the best person off the field to help grow the game. That's equally as important. And the documentary craze era that we're in at the moment, that everyone was Michael Jordan's biggest fan just because they watched Last Dance, it just shows it's not always about what happens on the field, but about the bigger picture and what you stand for and how you're building your brands. And in women's rugby, digitally is a really key space for that.
Yeah, and I was just going to add, like, for the commercial value for players themselves individually, like the people watching here, if you don't have to be an international rugby player to have a value to a brand. Like Jenny said to start with, the credibility is the first point, and that might be caps for England or for South Africa or for anyone else. But that also might be a shared interest in a topic. Like, so Z, as we all know, is here, is watching. She's a really good example of how credibility in a sport can be created. Oh, Jenny, keep the cat. Can actually be created, and that's through things like social media. If you want to work with a brand, social media is actually free for all intents and purposes. You can create a post, you can talk about a topic that you're really passionate about every single day, and it doesn't cost you anything to do that. And you can build up your personal brand, which is what we're here to talk about. And that will give you the credibility to brands to know that you believe in the topic, you understand it, and therefore, as long as you do have similar values to them, they will be interested in working for you. There's something, it's like, so micro influence is a really good example. Brands are now less likely to go to like your Cristiano Ronaldo's unless they've got the deepest pockets, because his sort of engagement rate, his return on investment can end up being quite low for a lot of brands. Whereas going to I would say influencers with 1,000 to 5,000 followers, you end up getting a better ROI. So people here listening, watching to this, you are within that sphere, and as long as you're creating content, you are of interest to brands, because your people are more likely to buy from you in your 1,000 to 5,000 followers, because they trust you more than the 10 million that follow Cristiano Ronaldo. They follow him, but they don't tend to trust every decision he says. Go buy this backpack. You won't. But your mates buy a backpack, put it on their social media, you're more likely to do it. That micro influence is really, really important. And actually, as everyone said here, the stories are better in women's sport than they are in men's. It's just categorically true. Men are very fortunate in some respects to, if they want to play sport, they pick it at school, they play it all the way up, they go to university, they end up at a club, and or just they end up at a club anyway, and that's kind of life set. For women, it's completely different. Everybody here has had to play a job or had to find a way to sustain themselves whilst playing at a high level of a sport. That's a much more interesting adversity story to a brand, and that's what brands are after. The fluffy, I had a great life, it was really easy, unfortunately doesn't sell, but an adversity story where you've overcome something that's inspiring to other people does sell, and that's really what they're after. So don't think this is out of reach to anyone. You don't have to be, like you said, you don't have to be an Emily Scarrett, to have a brand affiliation, to work with brands. You can do it really early on. Just, you've got to start creating content because it's free and it's easy. You don't, if you want to be a player or a pundit, a broadcaster, whatever it may be, start talking about it tomorrow. And that's really how you'll get the credibility, and your commercial value will come from that. Deciding what your commercial value is a whole other conversation, putting a number on it, but you have it immediately.
It's a really good point to make, Victoria, I think, is like, everybody has a story, and particularly when it comes to rugby, it's something we're all passionate about, so that's a really easy story for us to tell in our own way on our own channels. So yeah, thanks for that. I think that's really good.
What you said, Vic, about start, like if you want to do something, start tomorrow, and like in a small way. I think that's, if there's one thing I've learned in my like various ways of screaming into the rugby void, I think that it's that if you wait for either permission or for somebody to offer you something, or for the job you want to do to exist. And for my example, the concept of my business did not exist as a reality when I was younger. If you wait for those things, you probably won't, like, there's no point in waiting is my point. If you want to do something, like Victoria said, start tomorrow, but be aware of the fact that, don't be limited, or don't feel limited by what's currently available right now either. Like, this is a market and a sphere that's growing so quickly that it's even difficult to accurately measure. And, it's not fair to yourself to look around at the current list of jobs for women in rugby and pick one off of that, even, because I feel like in 5, 10, 15 years, that list is going to be significantly longer and a lot more diverse. So, start tomorrow, but start tomorrow with the understanding that you have a huge opportunity here to not only build yourself into a community that you feel passionate about, but also build exactly what you want within it, and really affect change personally and for the wider community. So don't be limited when you start tomorrow. Think big.
Yeah, and the cliche I think on top of that for me is always done is better than perfect. Just start. Don't worry about making a spelling mistake, or maybe it's not 100% right. Just get going. You'll learn what you want to say and what's important to you. I've always had maybe like 5 key things that you talk about, and just stick to those 5. They'll always be the messages and the things that are important to you. Don't worry about anything else. Yeah, and just start. It's the best way forward.
I think as well, Steph, I know we were talking earlier about, it doesn't necessarily need to be sort of the big hitters, like those big brands. It's like start local as well. And players that are just playing at club level or grassroots or whatever, there's the same opportunities there. Steph, do you want to kind of unpack?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So I think this is something that a lot of females will identify with. I've only very recently found a way to make myself by force comfortable, recognizing myself as an athlete and putting myself forward for self-promotion. I think it's something that a lot of female athletes struggle with and feel uncomfortable with. But the reality of the situation is that, one, if we don't self-promote, nobody probably will. And 2, we are interesting to people who play sport and to people who don't play sport. And just because you play at a level that isn't international doesn't mean that you aren't important in your community and interesting within your community, and somebody that a local business might be interested in having a sponsorship deal with. Your local car dealership, if you're like, the local champion at your club, and you've been there for so long and you've affected change and you're doing interesting things and you're telling interesting stories and you are involved in your community, you are the type of person that a local business will want to work with and would want to work with. And you're also the type of person that local business can actually afford. They can't afford probably the Ronaldos of the world, and nor would they want them. So, I think half of the battle in there is to find a way to become very comfortable with self-promotion and with recognizing the value that you offer to businesses and to brands around you, but then also having the ability to maybe go approach some brands and to put yourself out there in a way, and to not limit what you can do by waiting for things to be offered to you, because they're probably not going to be, and not because anybody doesn't think that you should have those opportunities or doesn't want to work with you, but because they might simply be unaware of you and unaware of that potential. That's the other thing, right? Like, so much of what we do right now, women's rugby, has to do with awareness and education for the wider public. And so sometimes when opportunities don't come, it is a result of being overlooked or undervalued, but a lot of the times it's just people being unaware. So don't limit yourself, and by shutting yourself out from opportunities just because you don't want to go after them or you don't feel comfortable going after them. But then also, as quickly as you possibly can, get as comfortable as you possibly can with self-promotion and valuing yourself.
I think that is a problem with the younger generation, with the confidence of what they put out on social media. Is they compare and contrast, and they're worried about the comments that are going to come back, like, you're an athlete, like, who are you to start preaching about, what you believe in? And I feel like you've just got to be brave, and like you said, reaching out to brands. If you don't ask, you don't get. And that I live by that motto. If you get told no, that's fine. You've got a response. You take that as a win, and then you can start a conversation back up further down the line. But I do think the confidence thing with the younger generation, you really shouldn't be bothered about that at all. You should just go for it. And if you're true to yourself and your beliefs, like Victoria said about the 5 things, if you stick to them and they're true to you, no one could trip you up. That's who you are as a person. That's who you stand for, and brands will see that.
It's a really, really good kind of segue, Emma, into like what I want to come to next, which is sort of finding your voice and that kind of balancing act of being part of a team sport, but also sort of promoting yourself as an individual within that team. So obviously then that has a flow on effect to benefiting the sport as a whole and your team as a whole. I guess, yeah, is there anyone, you know, that can kind of talk to that about finding your voice? Like, you know, how do you kind of nail down what are those 5 things that you are going to talk about and kind of be a champion for?
I think it's
go on, sorry.
Yeah, being clear about what you stand for is super key, because if you go ahead and just like, I'm going to speak to everyone because I want a free pair of boots, like you're going to get in a bit of a mess. But having like, okay, what is important to you? If you said to, a way I like to see it is, if you were to ask somebody else, what does flow stand for, or what does so-and-so stand for, what would you want them to say about you? And if you know what you would like people to say about you, then work about achieving that aura about you. And what does that mean? Okay, which other businesses also stand for these things? Who locally could you have a mutual benefit with? So not only are they going to support you by lifting your visibility as an individual or their brand, but how can you also give back to them, and do you align in other ways? And that's where you can start creating a bit of a hit list of brands who you feel that you can add both ways, because when you get brand partnerships that are mutually beneficial and you genuinely stand for the same things, they're the ones that are authentic. This is not like I'm paid to sell you this item this week, next week I don't care about it. Those sorts of brand partnerships are so short-lived and audiences can just see straight through them. So when it's more of an authentic relationship and there are genuine overlap and alignment of values, that's where you get the biggest rate and investment, and that's where you get that emotional buy-in. And like we've already said on this, female athletes already get a far stronger emotional buy-in than male athletes, because of the fact that if you've made it to the top of your game as a female athlete, people understand that your barriers are slightly more, so the integrity that you hold as a female athlete is a bit higher, so the emotional buy-in when brands support you is better. So making sure that you are true to your values when you're going after these brands. So like if you're someone who's quite passionate about environmental factors and then you go and get sponsored by BP, that might not look great and you might be damaging your brand slightly. So just giving yourself 5 or so things of, this is what I care about. Okay, who else cares about these things? Who else has openly said that they care about these things? And then just creating a voice for yourself. Like not everything has to have a paycheck at the end of it, but building a conversation and your values so that people go, oh, as soon as and it may be an environmental brand want to start working with athletes, who is the first one that comes to mind? You, because you've already talked about it and you've already openly said, I care about these things. Because at the end of the day, if you stand for nothing, then you fall for everything. So being clear about what you stand for, it is good. And it does, that you might alienate some brands because they might not be the same things, but at the end of the day, it would be much better to have a smaller group of partners who really do align with what you believe in, who are going to deliver some really authentic actions from audiences, rather than a quick buck that looked a bit poor and maybe would damage yours and their brand in the long run. I find that is really important when it goes after, when you're going after looking brands or partners as an individual, is just understanding that this is actually a two-way street and you can be beneficial for them as well. And like we're saying, you don't have to be Emily Scarrett. And this is the sort of weird advantage that I'm trying to say, it's an advantage of women's sport, because people don't really know much about women's rugby. They don't know if you didn't get picked on the weekend. They don't know if you played really badly because they probably didn't see it. So all they know is how well you're portraying your values and you as an athlete and as a person to them as a brand. So you don't have to be you don't think, oh, well, I'm not the best rugby player in my team, or I'm not the best rugby player in my league, so why should I be looking to build my personal brand? That doesn't matter. You don't have to be the best. There's enough room at the top for more than one. So just also understand that it's not about always being, you have to be the best rugby player to get the best sponsorships. It's about, you have to be a good person. Like look at Marcus Rashford last year, probably the most well-known athlete in the country, and there was literally no football played last year. So it's not about what he's doing on the field, it's also about what he cares about and what he stands for. And that's a really key thing. Athlete activism is what's actually going to be a thing that brands are looking for, because they want to tap into the values that someone stands for, and an athlete is less likely to then be on the news for doing something a bit silly than the generic celebrity that they might partner with. Athletes generally produce positive news stories, so that's the kind of angle that I would be going when you're trying to build your brand. Is like, what do I stand for, who aligns with that, and not stressing about, oh well, I've got to be the best player in the world to get anything. No, you don't. You just got to be a good person, or someone who stands for something at least.
Yeah, completely.
I take the Marcus Rashford thing. I won't name the client, but I did have one client come to me and say, can you do a presentation on Marcus Rashford and how we can make people like him work for us? And I was like, there's not 7 million Marcus Rashfords out there. The reason he's had success is because he has a genuine story. He's lived through an experience and he can relate to it. And despite the fact he's now a Man United England star, he's relating to those kids that were back where he was. And that's the thing, I think. So you mentioned something about authenticity and financial game. I think just stay true to your core. Do not, I get so sick of women. I used to be grateful. I'm so grateful I work in rugby when I was at rugby dinner and the only girl. I'm so grateful, I got an opportunity to man the press box and I'm the only woman in here. We should not be grateful. And those brands are really lucky to be working with some brilliant women in sport. And I think if you be authentic to yourself, don't think you have to change who you are for brands. And I would also say if brands come to you and you don't feel they're being authentic, so the brand do, brand say, they don't seem to be really doing it, they're just saying it, feel free to step back and challenge that, because that's the right thing to do. You shouldn't have to just say yes to brands or companies because they're your first sponsor or they're showing interest in you. Definitely stand firm and have that integrity, because there are enough good brands and good people out there that will do the right thing by you.
I think that I was just going to say, I definitely think that the athlete should question the brands and what they stand for, and obviously do their due diligence. And I feel if you enter into a partnership with a brand, where is the growth? It's not just about the money aspect. It's if you pick the right project, the growth will come. And then once your career in sport is over, you can use that platform then to still provide support to your sport and continue to grow the brand awareness of yourself, the club you stand for, or the sport that you used to play for or do play for. So I think that's where your voice comes from. You do have to be confident and brave, and even if a question sounds silly, say it anyway, because half of the time it's not going to be like that, and you'll get much more back when you do ask these questions, and it'll give the athletes a better understanding of which direction they need to be going in. But I do think, for these young athletes, guidance of people is key as well, because they don't really have access to that. Like people like us speaking now is great for them, but on a day-to-day basis, they don't, if they need to question something and they don't feel comfortable, who is their go-to to do that? And I think, for people like me, anyone can message me on LinkedIn and ask me a question, or for any guidance, I'll be happy to help. But I do think there needs to be more, especially in women's sport, more guidance for the athletes, just to give them a right push in the right direction.
That's totally true, Emma. And I think that brings us to the next topic, which is around knowing your worth, and what Jenny kind of touched on in Z's question. It's around when to say yes and when to say no, and having that confidence to really honestly review opportunities as they come your way. And I think, Jenny, you hit the nail on the head there. It's like us as female rugby players, I think traditionally have always been kind of that grateful, oh my God, amazing, we have kit that fits, oh cool, amazing. We need to kind of steer away from that now and actually acknowledge that we do have value. I think, be interesting to kind of, I guess, hear a little bit more from you guys about, identifying opportunities, and are there any tips that you can kind of give us around kind of what to look for? And you mentioned already about how they align with your personal values and things like that. Is there anything else, and particularly around the kind of financial side of things?
I'd say the financial side of things is really tricky. I guess the process I would follow if I was thinking, okay, if I'm going to go out and look for a sponsor, what would I do? Firstly, I'd look at myself. So what platforms am I on? What followers do I have? The key thing is engagement. I think to a point quite a few of the panelists have said, Ronaldo has amazing following, but his engagement are ridiculously, notoriously low. Actually, if you've got an engagement rate of 5% and higher, that's good. That's extremely good in this industry. So have a look, with Instagram, with Facebook, with Twitter, you can go into your insights and you can easily see what your average engagement rate is. And if you're not sure if that's good, whack it into Google and it'll tell you. So build a picture for yourself. So what's your profile at the moment? Are you on your club website? What are your social channels? What is your footprint and how can people access you? And whoever runs your club website, find out how many visitors you get, tally that up. So you've got this really sort of firm sort of overview. This is how many people I can reach, and this is the audience, and that's really key as well. Because remember to my point before that Gen Z and millennials are very much on brand minds. They're really hard to engage with, and I think you guys, that's exactly who you're speaking to, and they trust you and they value your opinion. So you've got the engagement rate, which shows when you talk they care, and then also you've got that audience profile. I think the next thing is to look at the brands. So if there's someone you're thinking you're interested in, whether it's a bigger brand or a smaller brand, get to know them and try to understand what they're trying to do. It's probably likely their chief exec or someone at the brand has spoken about how they're trying to grow the business, what their next steps are. So it could be a local brand who's just moved into the area that's trying to establish themselves. It could be a brand that's been there for years, a company that's been there for years and years, and maybe is really sort of old and over the hill and needs a refresh. So have a look at what the problem is they're trying to solve and think about how you could fix that by helping them access your audience. And then the monetary value piece is really, really challenging. It's something I think even when I do contracts now with really high-end elites, so we did one recently actually with Coke and Marcus Rashford, through to smaller deals, it really does vary. But what I would look at it and think of it as if it's an entry deal and you haven't done many, you haven't worked with many partners, have a look at the balance. Is it a brand that can help you as well? It's the case of getting in. It's a bit like when you're doing, it's not quite the same, but when you're doing work experience, you're just getting those sort of initial few pieces on your CV and building up your kind of experience and what you do. Think about maybe a value exchange. Does that feel right and feel comfortable based on the company, the brand? If it's someone bigger and you feel like actually they're asking a lot more for you, then I would initially throw the question back to them and get them to come back to you and find out who else they're working with and what their rates are. Don't be afraid to question. It's a really uncomfortable conversation, isn't it? Talking about how much are you going to pay me? How much are you paying other people? But feel free to have that challenging conversation. And I think then it's up to you to use your network, friends, colleagues, family, and just discuss, does this feel right? Does this feel like a fair assessment? And also when you look to, if you do decide to work with a local car dealership, for example, have an agreement in writing. There's lots of contracts you can find online. Have a set period, agree what you're going to deliver, what they're going to deliver for you. So you're really clear on what the outputs are, and then work with them to sort of, at the end of this period, how you're going to measure the output. So, if you put a post up, you'll say to them, by the end of it, you can get them X amount of engagement with your audience, or by the end of it, you'll have their logo, or you'll increase their profile in your club website, for example. So have a think of all those sort of elements as well. It sounds like quite a lot, but it's almost treating it as a bit of a business. Look at you first. What have you got to offer? Look at the brand and think, how can I help them? What can I help fix? And then think about, okay, what would our partnership look like? Because what you don't want to do is go, yeah, I'll work with you, not have clear parameters. Be really businesslike about it and say to them, this is what we're going to do together.
Yeah, at what point would you say you need to start thinking about like having things like in writing, contracts, perhaps even bringing in support from someone like an agent or a lawyer even?
I mean, I'd say initially, if you are a sort of a club level or girls, lower, you're not a sort of name player, I would, it can be an email agreement, just so you have something, officially down, confirmed that this is what we're going to do. It doesn't need to be a big, just something in writing. And then I think then when you get to sort of, the higher level, the sort of the Premier 15s, then I think then, it is worth looking at, are there any agents out there? I know there's some at the agents, there's Julia who used to be at the RFU, there's YMU, who used to be James Grant, are taking on more women's players, or speak to your team members and find out, if there are any of the senior team members who have been through the same and, had a deal. I think when we're looking at contracts, even with some of the talent we deal with. If it's for a micro influencer, for example, that Victoria mentioned, often it will just be literally an email agreement, and a lot of these templates you can find online. So don't get too caught in that side of things. It's more, I use contracts and templates and agreements more for my thought process, to think about what am I going to deliver the business, and what, as the athlete, what do I need to deliver for them as well.
Brilliant. Yeah, I know, Dante, you put in there that there's like this sort of weird diversion, or when it comes to talking money and negotiating and things like that, everyone seems to kind of try and avoid it like the plague. Are there any tips for sort of negotiating and, you know, having those transparent conversations?
Yeah, well, yeah, I was going to say, to be honest, it is really tough. The money conversation is really tough, and especially for women in general, it's just renownedly known that women struggle more than men to talk about money, and I think that is something we need to change. Talking to your friends, your families, your teammates, especially if you're in the Premier 15s, if you are an international player, there very rarely are resources for you to know even where to start. I do know some players just sort of pick a number that they feel comfortable with and see what happens. And if you feel like starting there, go for it. At the end of the day, it's better than nothing. But the first few times, it might not go perfectly. But actually having an open conversation with your teammates is always going to be the best place to start. Don't be scared. If you do something with a brand and someone else does it too, and they get paid more than you, well, this time you've just learned that you've got to ask for more next time. Don't see it as you're better than me, I need to keep the money hidden. It need to open that conversation up about money. And yeah, I personally would just say, pick something that you feel comfortable with and start there, and maybe add a little bit more to it. If you feel comfortable, add a bit more and then go in with that. All they can say is no.
Yeah, and when/if they do, I think it's really important to remember that somebody saying no to you is not a reflection of your value as a player, or your value as somebody within this market that can be of use to a brand. There's so many moving factors around why a brand or why a sponsor might say no to you, and maybe 2% of that has to do with you. So don't, you know, this fear, this discomfort, or feeling any sort of anxiety around this conversation and having it not go to plan or having it be rejected, is very human, and everybody would feel that. But it's very important to remember that it's not about you. You especially where we are in the sport right now, you know, you're going to be talking to people who aren't going to inherently understand the full value of what you can offer. They might not be in a position to take what they think is a risk, even if it's not a risk. There's also a huge amount of just underlying bias around women's sports in general, women's rugby, and all of that is to say that, you know, if you can find a way to not be so worried about what might feel like a rejection, because it's not going to be a rejection of you or your value as an athlete or as a marketable person. And also kind of tied to that, and what I was saying earlier, I think each situation is going to have its own specifics, and it's going to vary greatly. But if you can walk into the room, and whether that's you know, negotiating a player contract or negotiating a sponsorship or offering yourself as an ambassador, if you can enter the room not being thankful for whatever they give you, that's going to be a huge step forward. This is something I wish somebody would have told me a long time ago, is to kind of park that that mindset of like, oh, I'm just really thankful that they're giving me the time. Like, just leave that part at home, because you have more to offer them that they know right now, and that's their problem maybe. So if you can walk into the room without feeling that you know, immediate urge to just say yes, or to kind of be thankful for whatever they offer you because it's better than nothing, that's something that we're not doing ourselves any favors by holding on to. So yeah, just walk into the room without that, without feeling thankful for the time. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And also, like, we've been doing so much of our sport for free for so long, and we should have been paid for so much of it for such a long time. Yeah. As soon as you add value to yourself, people perceive you as being higher value. So if you go in expecting nothing, then that's sort of devalues the product, in a sense, the product of what you're selling. And if you don't expect any money, then how do you expect anyone to ever pay you? If you're always willing to do something for free, no one's ever going to turn around and go, actually, do you want some money? Like, if whilst you're doing it for free, they're going to keep taking it for free. And in terms of just seen some of the questions with from Z, how do you weigh up doing something for free or for charging it? I'm about to literally say what you've written here, Jenny, but like, it is weighing up that benefit of the exposure. So like, if this is going to benefit you and it's going to grow your profile, and it may lead to 3 or 4 or 5 other doors opening later down the line, then 100% go for it. But you will understand from what they're asking you to do whether you should be paid for it. And if it's a huge brand and they're asking you to do a load of promotion for you and it's going to make a big difference for them, then 100% they should be paying you for that, because otherwise they would be spending money there, and they will have budget. If it's a one-off type of event and it's going to really uplift your profile and it's actually going to make a big change for you, you might gain 200-300 followers from it, then that's going to grow your engagement in the long run. So it's just looking at that bigger picture. If it's not going to create too much of a deficit of your own time now, then go for it. And if it's going to grow you in the long run. But yeah, if they're asking for a lot from you and there's appearances and there's loads of time, then that's a bit of a different question. I think you're 100% within your right to ask for a bit of money around that, and adding value to yourself is only going to look good in the long run. If they say no but you're still happy to do it, then at least they know in the future, this is someone who we need to consider paying. But if you never ask for it, then that conversation of money will just get further and further away. And if you do something for free with a brand for 6 months, it's going to be a lot harder to get some money out of it at the end, because they've been like, oh, you've been doing it for free for so long. So it's always good to have that conversation, and it is difficult. But if you set those parameters of like, right, this is essentially a job contract, I'm going to post this many times or do this many appearances or be at this many events, whatever it is, for this amount of money. That's really simple. You take all the emotion or the tenseness out of asking for money. It's actually like it's a financial transaction. I'm giving you this in return for that. You can make it quite simple if you want it to be. And it's just about being confident and to ask for that, because unfortunately, we are probably our first generation of people where money has come into the question, which is great. So we should be excited that it's even an option, but not grateful, obviously, because in the future, it'll make it a lot easier for everybody else.
Yeah. 100%. I think, we've got probably about 10 minutes left. So what I'm going to do now is just kind of open the floor really to Q&A. So if you feel confident enough, feel free to just come off mute and ask the question. Otherwise, you can just drop it into the chat. Let me just see if we've got anybody. Yeah, go on, Dante. Off you go.
Hi, can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Great. So earlier, Emma was talking about how clubs need to be doing a lot of the heavy lifting for raising awareness about the women's matches. How do you feel about keeping the women's section separate from the men's, like a separate social media account from the men's, or like in the case of Harlequins, like they have one for their men's and then one for the women's on Instagram and most other socials, I think. Or in the case of Exeter Chiefs, who have everything all under one umbrella.
Can I take this one?
Yeah, sure.
Hi, by the way. I think that when clubs run, on one hand, it's really lovely to have the mentality of everybody is together, and I'm not against that as a concept. However, the reach and the potential demographic of a women's team is just different than the men's team, and by most measures of the market, a lot bigger potentially. So I think that when a club runs their social media accounts either identical or under the same handle even, they are just going to be inherently limiting the reach of their women's team and limiting the marketability of that team. And by extension, I guess they're not really acknowledging those differences that are not necessarily negatives, but rather just a wide and staggering array of advantages that they're not exploring. That makes sense.
No, that was really great. Thanks so much. I'll be telling Tom Soulsby about this if you remember.
You can tell it came from me too.
Cool. So we've got one from Ashley. Do you have any advice for reaching out to brands? Should we be giving a reason why we want to work with them or something different?
I mean, I think, obviously when you reach out to brands, they're going to ask you why they think they should invest in you, and you need to, tell them who you are and what you stand for and why you think a partnership with that brand would be beneficial. And then they'll probably come back and ask you, why would it be beneficial? Because brands just don't jump into people. I get told no every single day from brands. It's just, and when I go to a brand with one of my clients, they ask me why they should invest in that athlete. And basically, I've stripped everything back. So I have a whole list. I can add and tweak things and say, I think this might sound better, but it's their core of who they are and what they want to put out to the world. So I think you just have to, it goes straight back to being genuine and having the integrity. And then the brands just need to decide whether they want to work with you or not. There's nothing much more. I don't think if you have to persuade a brand to be involved, I don't think it's the right fit for you, because the brand should know. They should, after having a conversation with you, they should be like, you know what, we've got a really good feel about you. I think we could do some great content, or, have a great partnership. If they keep questioning it, I personally wouldn't feel comfortable moving forward.
If you want to cold call a brand as such, or approach someone from the off, one thing I would say is back to that helping them. What's their problem? So, even if it's a big brand or a local brand, get a feel for the company. What are they trying to crack? What's their sort of marketing issue? What kind of customers are they trying to reach? And then have a think about how you could help that. Are you in your local community? The club's really established, really love, you're the heartbeat of that club. You are offering something, you're giving them a way into the local community. Or if it's a slightly, maybe a bigger brand that maybe is trying to get sort of its claws into the community, often you'll see, so for example, on my local Vodafone store, they're not my chosen brand, I'm O2, just so you know, and they have tooting Vodafone. They're trying to get their way into the community by just having tooting on their windows. So think about what else you could offer them to help them get ingrained with the community. But I would do a bit of Googling. If there's a brand that whether it's locally or is involved with your club already, have a little bit of digging, because they will have challenges, and there'll be somewhere where you can potentially help them, the way you can help them to reach an audience, and see, your line into them could be, I think I could help you crack this. Who doesn't love to get an email saying, I can fix your problem?
Yeah, I totally agree on that. And if you're going from like that cold calling aspect, just having a look on LinkedIn and looking at who their marketing department doing, or their brand department, and have a look at their recent campaigns. What have they been saying on social media? What is the stuff that they're promoting in their recent campaigns? Because obviously that's going to be part of a wider marketing strategy for the year. So if they're really key on equality, go in and say, I've loved what you did with XYZ project about equality. This is something I'm really passionate about as well as a female rugby player. Bang, you've got your bite, you've got your hook, but make it personal. I think it's great to start conversations with people, but copy and paste emails, generic messages on LinkedIn are quite easy to spot. So if you're going to look into that brand, really just have that try and find the bite of, why am I specifically, like you're saying, fixing a problem? So find the brands that do stand for those similar values and say, hey, look, we 100% align here. Let's have a chat. Because as soon as people connect with you, or you have a conversation with them, whether it be a Zoom or face-to-face, they'll absolutely buy into you as an athlete, because there are so many good things that we stand for. But it's initially going, right, okay, which brands are being really loud about equality, because that's something that's big for me, and then that's your hook. That's where you can help them. That's where you can amplify a strategy that you can already see externally they are working alongside.
It's almost like going for a job, isn't it? It's like why are you the right person for the role, you know, or if you're going for a promotion, for example, it's demonstrating why you deserve that.
On that, before we move on really quick, I just want to add on with when you are providing a solution for their problem, make sure that you are fully explaining all the parts of why you're the right fit for it. I've done this myself a couple of times and forgotten that the general person might not understand why having somebody talk about body positivity in rugby is so important. I forget to add on, because there's not a lot of sports that offer this sort of discussion in a wider way, and because there's not a lot of female sports that have a wide range of body types that are required within, you know, like it might sound to you as somebody who's deeply involved in it, it might sound really obvious, but for somebody who's that doesn't have that same level of involvement as you, it might not be as obvious. So just when you are offering them solutions to problems, make sure that you are fully explaining all of the reasons why you are the perfect fit for it in a way that doesn't sell or doesn't skip over anything that for you is obvious, but for everybody else might not be. That makes sense.
Right.
Yeah, and I would just add to that you know what you want to get out of it too. If you come to a brand and say, I want to work with you, but you don't really know what that would look like, they might say yes, but you're not going anywhere from that point. You need to have what's essentially a call to action. Like, where do we go next? What are you interested in doing? Even if it's as broad as saying we'll create content together, that's great. But make sure you get some specifics, even if they come from you or during the first kind of conversation, get further down the road, because otherwise you just sort of end up in a no man's land where you'll find that brands find themselves too busy to really sit down and think about it for you. But if you have some solution, doesn't have to be the right one, but an idea of a solution, they're more likely to drive that forward with you. Having kind of at least an idea of a final product is better than nothing.
Right, thanks. And Z, so you've got your hand up.
Yeah, hi guys. Really enjoying the conversation. Thank you so much, dropping so many gems. So I have sort of a question. So if, let's say, for example, you have two brands, one brand, you're sort of, if you go with one brand, you'll sort of be the one that sticks out because the audience is not really, it's one sort of type of audience. So being with that brand, you would stick out, versus a brand that usually has the people you're trying to reach are already sort of in that audience. So it's sort of like big fish in a small pond versus small fish in a big pond. In what position would be ideal from a sponsorship?
Who's fighting after you then?
Sorry?
Who's fighting after you then?
I'm asking for a friend.
You're asking for a friend. Yeah.
I think it's important to think of or to consider what you want or how you are going to measure success outside of financial compensation, of course, how you are going to measure success for yourself. If down the line, you would sleep better at night knowing that you put something that you cared about in front of a completely new audience and brought in somebody that had never considered it before to your way of thinking or the things that you care about, then that's an argument one way. And if you at this point in your career are looking to gain followers and gain traction and continue to build and expand on the existing resume that you have, and just add more to that within the same, I don't want to say the same sort of communities, but something like that, then that's an argument the other way. But I think that it's very important to make sure that in all of these sorts of decisions that we're making, that you're thinking really, really hard and really honestly with yourself about how you are measuring success for yourself outside of the money part of it. Because if you can answer that part, then a lot of the decisions about who to work with and when and why become very easy to make, because they're not really decisions anymore. It's obvious.
I think it's about individuality as well. Do you want to go with the generic sponsor, or do you want to push the boundaries and go left field and do something totally different? Because I think that's how we grow, and brands grow as well. And then if you took that other deal, I'm pretty sure sooner rather than later, other athletes will follow into that space. So it will probably pan out either way for your friend.
Yeah, for your friend. And also on that, like I do think there's always a bit of a difficult position with female athletes. Is like you get picked up by like those huge big name brands or big name agencies, and you're like, yeah, I just want to do it to say I'm with them, but because you're always going to be, you end up being a bit of a small fish in that big pond, you sort of get forgotten about potentially, and you just have to ride the wave or the path that they've already created. Whereas when you go in with brands that are potentially a bit smaller and you might be their leading athlete or their leading ambassador, you have a bit more autonomy over how it's directed, and it's a bit more authentic to what you stand for, because there are not as many other external factors determining what path they go on, because you're their priority. It might end up being a bit more authentic to what you originally stood for, rather than selling yourself a bit short just because it's a cool big brand that you'd love to be associated with. You don't want to ever lose, like never forget why you started, and the why you started was to be you and to sell your dream. Make sure that everyone who you work with 100% buys into what you want to be and what you stand for. And that big brand may well do it, absolutely brilliant, go for it. But if there's at any point you feel like, I don't know if they're into this as much as I would like them to be, this is your one shot. They've got loads of shots and all these athletes they can do. This is your one. So just stay true to why you started and what you want to be, and don't be afraid to say no to the big fish, because I'm sure they'll come back later down the line when you're killing it.
Yeah, and it's regardless of the size too, like, you know, what their game plan is, or what they're offering in terms of the type of content that they want to create, or the way in which they want to use your reach. You know, like if it's just like playing style, right? Like if you want to play really open rugby, don't go play for a team that's really rigid. But if you want to, you know, execute a system well, then that might be a good fit for you. It's just, I hate, you know, that's a rugby analogy, but you know, it's about knowing how you want to play the game, and then putting yourself in an environment that you can play the way you want to play.
Thank you, guys.
Is that how Bristol did it?
You'll find out.
All right, well, we've run over a little bit of time, but I'm not sure, I don't think there's any more kind of questions. So I just want to say, on behalf of the Girls Rugby Club, first of all, big thank you to everyone who's joined tonight. I hope you found it useful, and I hope you drew some value out of the chat. And then also a massive thank you as well to our panelists. You know, an hour and a half on a Wednesday night is yeah, it's really, really precious from you guys, so thank you for that. If you like as well, if there's anyone that hasn't been able to join that you know of, this has been recorded and we'll be uploading it to our YouTube channel. So keep an eye out for that in the coming days, and feel free to share that with anyone. But otherwise, I'll leave you to go and enjoy the rest of your evening. So thank you.